I have a question about the welfare system. Do you think the welfare system has caused some of this problem?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's pretty irrefutable, that what the system has done, however well-intentioned it's been, is to put in place perverse incentives for people in terms of developing a work ethic, which of course you need to rise out of poverty and stay out of poverty. So for some groups, the social safety net has been there. When they fall, go through some hard times, helps them get back on their feet, and then they're on their way. But for other groups, it's been a lure and a trap. And you have multi-generations of people taking advantage of the welfare state, and politicians giving them an incentive telling them that, if you have a child and the father's not around, you get a government check. So why not? And I think that has been very destructive, I think, in terms of these outcomes, marriage outcomes, out of wedlock births, female-headed homes, and poverty.
Mr. Riley, over on your left. So 2 days ago, the Wall Street Journal did a demographic breakdown of the Virginia governor's race, and it showed that there were gains by Glenn Youngkin in each demographic group relative to 2020, except among blacks. Just 12% of blacks in Virginia voted for Youngkin. What do you chalk that up to, and what could Glenn Youngkin do in the future to include more blacks in his coalition?
Well, I don't know how he campaigned. I mean, I don't know if he went into black communities and campaigned. In the past, I've said I think that more of that needs to be done. Republican candidates need to show up. They need to show up in the barbershops. They need to show up in the communities. They need to advertise on black radio and black Twitter and black Facebook, and they typically don't do that. They typically believe they can win these races without black support, and time spent courting a group whose vote you're probably not going to get is time not spent courting other groups. So they make that decision. So I don't know what kind of campaign he ran in terms of outreach to the black community. I can't answer that. I will say this. People often ask me, Republicans support school choice, and so why don't more blacks vote for Republicans? But blacks aren't the only group that behave this way. There's the old joke about Jews earning like Episcopalians and voting like Puerto Ricans. I'll give you a more recent example. Out in California, there was a ballot initiative in 2020 on racial preferences in higher education. The state had banned them back in the 90s, and there was an effort to reinstate them. It went down, thankfully. But it went down, leading the fight to take it down were Asian Americans in California who overwhelmingly opposed it. Those same Asian Americans overwhelmingly voted for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So blacks aren't the only ones who have this sort of cognitive dissonance, on these issues. Education often isn't enough of a wedge issue to flip someone's vote. That could be changing, as what we saw in Virginia plays out, but it's not a unique behavior among blacks.
Okay, well, thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you for being here tonight. Great speech. My question is, you mentioned the media. What could be done to change pop culture and to at least move the needle? Any suggestions?
Oh my goodness. The media has been hugely irresponsible, particularly with their coverage, as I was saying, of this protests, a lot of racial issues. Partly this has to do with who goes into the media, the people who make careers out of that. There have been, I was talking to a group earlier, saying there have been polls going back decades on who, the voting habits of the White House correspondents. overwhelmingly vote Democrat, 80, 90% of them. And of course, this is going to be reflected in their coverage. What's happened in the media, and social media has really been a big problem here, is that because everyone has a camera now at the ready, they can film something and it can show up on cable news and loop for the next 3 weeks. So a rare occurrence can be made to seem like it happens all the time. Because something that happens rarely gets more coverage, the assumption is that it's happening more often. And that is why the media needs to be more responsible about putting these things into context, and too often they don't do that. But it's a business. I mean, and I think to the extent that their bottom line is hurt, they'll change the way they operate. One of the things that's changed recently, and this might be a little inside baseball in the media, is that at newspapers, in particular, the business model has changed. Newspapers used to make their money off ads. When papers like the Wall Street Journal would sell a $100,000 full-page ad for IBM. And that was what was paying the reporters' salaries, keeping bureaus open, and so forth. It wasn't newsstand sales. It wasn't subscriptions. We didn't care how many papers we sold at a newsstand. That's not how the bills were paid at a newspaper. It was the big advertisers. That model has been flipped on its head now. What drives newspaper revenue are subscriptions. You are slaves to your readers. And that is forced, whereas a business wanted more balanced coverage because they want business from everybody. The paper now gives the readers what they want in spades because you need those subscriptions to keep coming. And it's made papers become more extreme, more partisan in their coverage, and you've really seen that play out in recent years, particularly at newspapers.
Yes, thank you again. I want to ask about education. How is education going to help create a post-racial America? And how do we get there specifically?
Well, again, the post-racial to me sounds a little utopian. I have a more sort of tragic view of human nature. So I'm not sure what multiracial country is post-racial? I mean, the expectation, people talk about diversity being America's strength. No, that's not it. America's strength, and Kendall got into this a little bit, America's strength is being able to overcome all the problems that come with diversity by focusing on what unites us. That's our strength. And to the extent we go down a road of the critical race theorists and the people who obsess over race and have everyone looking inward and talking about our differences, going to create all kinds of problems. And you're never going to get rid of that entirely. And I don't know that you need to. But the focus in terms of public policy needs to be on colorblindness and treating everyone equally, and opportunity. And what education does is expand the opportunities you have. So to the extent we're screwing up education, we are really, really, really screwing up. And this has been a problem for some time. I'm a big believer in school choice. That if our jails and prisons are not full of college graduates, they're not full of high school graduates, frankly. I'm not being facetious here. They're not. You get a kid to graduate from high school, you'd be surprised at how much you have reduced the chances of that child becoming involved with the criminal justice system just by getting them a high school degree. So I think it's a lift all boats approach to helping people in society. You need that educational foundation, and so long as we're assigning kids to schools based on their zip codes, that's going to be a problem. So long as we have teachers' unions that can put the interests of the adults in the system ahead of the interests of children, that's going to be a problem. And that's the system we have right now.
Quick question. How can white people effectively minister your message tonight?
It's not your fight. No, and I don't mean to be cute about that. This is about self-development. It really is. Internal development within a community. And there's only so much outsiders can do. There's only so much the government can do. And I often argue it's what the government needs to stop doing. Stop lifting the minimum wage and pricing blacks out of jobs, younger and less experienced people, a disproportionate number of whom happen to be black, out of jobs. Stop keeping people trapped in failing schools. Stop the occupational licensing requirements that make it more difficult for budding black entrepreneurs to get something started. Stop the government handouts that provide a disincentive to work or to have only enough children that you can take care of. I mean, it's really, that's the title of one of the previous books, Please Stop Helping Us. And it's about what we need to stop doing. What I want everyone to do, regardless of race or ethnicity, is to be able to speak openly and honestly about the problem. And there's too much silencing and canceling going on today. There should be a free exchange of ideas. You should be able to express your opinion without being shouted down or canceled or just stating obvious truth. I'll give you an example. I just was talking to someone about this the other day. Recently, you had a couple law professors at elite law schools who mused aloud that over the years they'd noticed black students in their classes concentrating in the bottom half of the class in terms of grades. One of the teachers was pretty much fired for saying this. The other one was no longer allowed to teach a required class in law school that she taught for many years. No one came forward and said, you're wrong, and we have the data to prove you're wrong. No one challenged the truthfulness, the veracity of the statement. You just weren't allowed to say it. And so these schools, this happened at Penn Law School and at Georgetown, the two elite law schools. Now, why wouldn't black kids be concentrated in the lower part of the class? You're admitting them with lower standards, with lower LSAT scores, with lower GPAs. The LSAT is a pretty good predictor of how you're going to do, at least freshman, your first year in law school. If you're going to admit kids with lower standards, why should anyone be surprised if they're concentrating in the lower part of the grade? They've set these kids up to fail. I mean, you're talking about some very smart kids, black kids at places like Georgetown and Penn. I mean, there was a study done of black kids at MIT some years ago. And black kids at MIT had scored in the 90th percentile on the math portion of the SAT. 90th percentile of all kids in the country. Talking about some very smart kids. But among their peers at MIT, they were in the 10th percentile. So kids that would have been hitting it out of the park, Dean's List, at a less selective school, are concentrated in the lower half of the grade at MIT, or they're switching to easier majors, or they're dropping out at higher rates. This is affirmative action at work. This is how it's playing out in the real world. And you can't talk about it. You're not allowed to. You could lose your job as a law professor if you say it out loud. That's got to change.